On the agenda tonight, we're going all the way back to the late 1950s. We're going to be taking a look at Gene Vincent and the Blue Caps, and they're going to be performing Be-Bop-a-Lula. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So let's get Gene and the guys up on screen and see how they get on.
So we'll bring out Mr. Be-Bop-a-lula himself, Gene Vincent. Here he is.
Well, be-bop-a-lula, she's my baby. Be-bop-a-lula, don't mean maybe. Be-bop-a-lula, she's my baby. Be-bop-a-lula, don't mean maybe. Be-bop-a-lula, well, she's the gal in the red blue jeans. She's the queen of all the teens. She's the woman that I know. She's the woman that Be-bop-a-lula, she's my baby. Be-bop-a-lula, don't mean baby. Be-bop-a-lula, she's that's got that beat. She's the woman with the flying feet. She's the one that walks around the store. She's the one that deals the money. Be-bop-a-lula, she's my baby. Be-bop-a-lula, don't mean me. Be-bop-a-lula, she's my baby, my baby, Be-bop-a-lula, don't mean me. Be-bop-a-lula, she's my baby. Be-bop-a-lula, don't mean me. Be-bop-a-lula, she's my baby, my baby, That's thank you very much. Thank you. I'm kind of nervous here. That's a song called Be-bop-a-lula.
And there we have it. I thought I'd let the video play on a little bit longer after they'd finished because of the way that Gene just openly admits to the audience. He says, I'm a little bit nervous. And you can certainly see the way that he's performing on stage, that he's looking into the sky for most of the performance, and I don't think we've got any seating above the stage here. So it's obviously something that he struggled with, and being that kind of personality, when you're listening to interviews of him speaking at the time, he is very reserved and very introvert, and that really comes across in this performance. Obviously, with this sound, it was one of those songs that would draw comparisons with Elvis Presley, and being the early form of rockabilly, as some people describe this as, this particular song, but also the rock and roll sound, Elvis is one of those guys that was totally different on stage with eye contact, and it is something to look into when you're watching a performer who is confident on stage and they're an extrovert on stage. They make eye contact with every member of the audience, and it doesn't really matter whether the audience are into it or not, they're just putting on that show. And it's nice to see here that Gene has a different personality. You don't want all of your performers to be exactly the same. And Gene is visibly nervous here, but still nailing the vocal, and the band are getting into the performance. We got the choreography in there, a really cool lead solo. But we will get the guitar out and jump into this. Just have a look at the progression. Of course, when we're talking about late 50s, this is something that was very much new at the time, and this sound really was taking over the airwaves. So just getting into the guitar here, breaking it down, we've got our 1-4-5 chord progression in E, so it means we're having E, A, and B. Actually, it's going to be the B7th in terms of that final chord. And it is difficult to hear exactly what's going on with the guitar. It's not particularly high in the mix. We've got the piano quite high in the mix, and it's going to be pretty much along the lines of that kind of vibe. We might be having a little run up and down the running bass line of the... that kind of thing. And if you're wanting to play along with this, it's just 2nd fret of your A string, and then place on the 4th fret of your A string as well. Hit that low E string with those notes. I'm also applying a little bit of palm mute, so I'm resting my palm on where the string meets the bridge, so it just makes those notes cut out a little bit faster. So we've got this like that. If you want to play that little walking bass line, then we've got that kind of thing. Open E string, 4th fret of the E string, 2nd fret of the A, 4th fret of the A, back down to the 2nd fret. Like that. And earlier I was hitting that low E string with it, so going in order to get it to fill in the sound a little bit more. And that's going to be it for your E. Going over to the A, exactly the same thing. So move everything that you just did down a string, exactly the same fingering. Then we come back to the low E again. And now this is where we've either got a similar thing that we're going to be playing in B. If you want to play exactly the same thing, you're going to have to stretch quite a lot in order to get this stretch of like that with the little finger. Then down to the A, then back down to the E, and then we're into the B7th before the turnaround, but we might have that little run up, which is open E string, 4th fret of your E string, A, B flat, into the B7th. So you can do a little run up if you want to, but as long as you keep that rhythm along those kind of lines, then you're going to be fine. And there I was doing a little upstroke just to accentuate that very last stroke of that rhythm. But that's going to be all of your progression going on here. The only other thing that we've got here are the stabs that come in, which are just going to be your E chords. So just focus on the lower strings probably here. So we get that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, like that. Pretty straightforward. The only thing to watch out for there is getting those stops in with the right hand, hitting that chord and then stopping the strings with the right hand. You can even take your hand off the chord and then mute the strings with that left hand as well, just to get a nice sharp ending to the chord. The other thing is we have a little movement up here to our chord, which is going to be that exact same E chord that we have down at the bottom. If I was playing the top end of the E, and I take all of these notes an octave higher, so your octave is where the 2 dots are, and place in that part of the chord, we get that sound. I think it's Johnny Meeks here on guitar, so he's just moving up to that top part of the chord, octave higher. I think he might be down at the bottom earlier in the song. It will just mix it up, just to keep it a little bit more interesting. There was a little lead guitar solo in there from Johnny, so we're going to jump into it and have a look at what's going on there. Another part of rhythm that I did miss out is this little jump into the A chord and then going to your open strings. So it sounds like this. Like that, which is just playing that exact same rhythm that we just had, but then barring over your A chord and just letting go of it. So on with the downstroke, off with the upstroke, and you want to be a little bit careful with that upstroke just to hit a few strings, and we're not going and kind of hitting all of them. It's very much a going from that D string if you can, just like that. And you can hear that cutting through a few times. Again, that's something that Johnny's throwing into that rhythm just to keep it a little bit more interesting. But let's jump into this solo. Okay, so we've jumped straight up to that 12th fret and we've got really cool little jump over there. All of that kind of stuff and bends. Obviously these aren't exactly what's being played here, but got some really cool lines going on here, and we then move down to our first position here. So it means that we're now going to be an octave below. All of your, by the way, pentatonic shape 1. That's what we're going to be using, and let's have a little listen. And there we've got that little slide. Or the... And that was... Now, placing on that first finger after that slide. I don't think we're quite at that point yet. And we've got this... A little riff that he's throwing in there. Little run there, we've got our that kind of thing, and then we do end the solo something like that. It's quite a fast ending to the solo. That kind of took me a little bit by surprise. So the solo does cut out when we've got this. Because we then get a nice intro, or at least the ending of that solo is actually Gene's vocal when he's leading into the next verse. So he comes in with that vocal saying, well, but he holds on that note for a very long time. So he's going, well, da-na-na-na-na, and then we'll be back into it. So that's where that solo just ends a little bit earlier than you're expecting, but that's why, because you don't want to have too many things going on at the same time. This is now Gene's vocal that's going to take center stage, and then we're back into a verse. Also look out for the way that we're navigating throughout this solo, jumping to the higher octave first, but then descending down to our second fret with this pentatonic shape 1 that you're going to be playing in. And we also have that shape 1 on the 12th fret. So when we're introducing these major notes, when we're having this, that, all that kind of stuff, we're starting with that major, just hammering onto it, which just takes it to that kind of happier place, but it's very bluesy, rock and rolly, very Chuck Berry kind of sounding, that with that hammer on. We're not going to be playing exactly the same notes that Johnny's playing here, but it's along the lines of... And then we move down to our... And then we've got the... little run, and then it's not going to be exactly that because we do cut off a little bit earlier so that Gene can come in with that vocal. But see the way that he's changing it up by going to the higher octave first, then descending down, which leaves him in a really good position to then get back into the rhythm. So once he's finished his solo, it's really convenient to then get into it after that run. He's and then we're back into the rhythm there that I showed you earlier. I do want to get into a little bit of the history and career of Gene Vincent because he was such an important part of that rock and roll sound and rockabilly sound coming to the forefront. He was one of those guys that was influenced by many different genres of music. There's country music in there, rhythm and blues, gospel as well. He received his first guitar when he was 12 years of age. He left school at the age of 17 and didn't go into any further education. He went straight into the US Navy at that point, but he wasn't old enough to join up, so he had to get his parents to sign so that he was allowed in. Gene had planned on having a career in the Navy, and he re-enlisted, and the bonus that he received for doing that, he spent on a Triumph motorcycle. But that same year, 1955, he shattered his leg in an accident, an automobile accident, and I assume that he was on his motorcycle when that happened. And they wanted to amputate his leg, but he refused. And fortunately, the leg was okay. It did recover, but it meant that he had a limp for the rest of his life. And he wore a steel sheath around that leg for the rest of his life as well. At this point, he was still known as Vincent Craddock, so the Gene Vincent stage name hadn't come along yet, but it did when he started playing locally in Norfolk, Virginia. He set up a rockabilly band, and they started to gain a reputation to the point where they entered a talent contest, and they won that contest, which was set up by DJ Sheriff Tex Davis, and Tex then went on to become Gene's manager. In 1956, he wrote Be-bop-a-lula, and they recorded that as a demo, and off the back of that demo, they got a record deal with Capitol Records. He also signed a publishing deal, and that song was initially given to radio stations before it had been officially released. So it was already a very popular song on the radio by the time it was officially released. It means that it was a huge hit, and it got to number 7 in the charts. So Gene and the band really hit the ground running, and it stayed in the charts for 20 weeks. They released Lotta Lovin' in 1957, and that was another huge hit. It got to number 13 in the charts. They toured Australia with Eddie Cochran, and by the way, Eddie is performing at this show as well. So there's going to be a link to this video in the description below. If you want to watch the whole hour's worth of the whole performance of Gene's and then Eddie's afterwards, then you can do. Just click on that link. But when they toured together in Australia, across the course of their Sydney Stadium concerts, they played to 72,000 people in all. They performed at the Ed Sullivan Show in 1957 as well, and the song that they performed there was Dance to the Bop. He also appeared on Town Hall Party, which was a country TV and radio show, and this was in 1958. He then had a dispute with the tax people over in the USA. So he made a bit of a break over to England, where he appeared on TV and also performed. He toured Europe as well, appearing in Germany, Netherlands, France, and he did tour the whole of the UK. And this was with Eddie Cochran as well. It was at this time in 1960 that himself, Eddie, and Sharon Sheedy were involved in a high-speed traffic accident. And this is where Gene broke his ribs, his collarbone, he damaged his leg even more. Sharon broke her pelvis, and sadly Eddie was thrown from the vehicle and suffered serious brain injuries and died the next day, and it was after this that Gene then returned to the USA. In 1961, promoter Don Arden convinced Gene to come back to the UK, considering the success that he had here, and he performed at the Agincourt Ballroom in Camberley, which is a venue that I have played myself in my younger years a couple of times. And in 1962, he was on the same bill as the Beatles, and that was in Hamburg. And in 1963, he appeared in court for pointing a gun at his wife, and it was something that she forgave him for, but he still had that court date. And following the success in the UK, he then moved to Britain in 1963, and he also pulled a gun on Jet Harris while he was on tour, but they later went on to become friends. In 1963, he was touring again, this time with the Outlaws, and they had a guitarist by the name of Ritchie Blackmore at that time. He unfortunately had alcohol problems, which did mar that tour somewhat. He continued to record in the late 60s and early 70s, and he played his last gigs on the 3rd and the 4th of October, because he then went back to the USA to visit his father. And unfortunately and sadly, Gene died on the 12th of October, so just 11 or 12 days after those gigs that he played, and this is in 1971, at the age of just 36, and he died from a combination of a ruptured ulcer, internal hemorrhage, and heart failure. But Gene is another example of an artist that was taken at such a young age, only 36. He has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He was inducted into the Rockabilly Hall of Fame in 1997, and the year after that, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Here, with his blue caps, just in full flow, and such an important part of that rockabilly sound at the time and the rock and roll sound at the time, which was brought to the forefront. So thank you guys so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!